Thanks, Professor Alam, for giving me the opportunity to speak. The topic of my paper is Two Paths to Religious Reconciliation, Akbar and Dara Shikoh. So, for some time at least, you will not be going over to what was the exact idea of conflict and cooperation, but it will be only reconciliation and no conflict in between. So we'll be discussing that. Of course, I'll be taking Akbar first. There are up till now many assessment of Akbar's religious policy, but most of these are generally confined or generally concentrate that the main objective behind the religious tolerance or having the non-Muslims inducting the non-Muslims into the polity and other things were simply because of the political motives. A deliberate attempt, a very clever attempt by Emperor Akbar to create a better or say atmosphere or better opportunities for his reign. It seems that we generally, as historians, try to read things according to what we wish and what in our own times is going on. It's the present which is projected on the past. Forgetting that individuals are different, their way of thinking are different, and the time we are talking about may be quite different from what we consider it to be or think it to be. So my first assertion rather or opinion is that Akbar's attempt was not confined only to political motives for attaining certain results out of that. There are things which are spontaneous, and we should also not forget that India was like at the time of Akbar. If we only think of one thing, where Akbar was born, it was at Rana Prasad's house at Amarkot. Why of all the persons or all other say opportunities or say or any other options, Humayun could only trust without any qualms his pregnant wife to Rana Prasad and no one else. So what we always look as a sort of a binary, that there are Hindus and Muslims and there is already a clash and there is already a distrust and they are very different from each other. So these are the things which we have to reconsider as students of history. Not only that, one has also to remember that India of that time was very different. If you read how while Chaitanya was coming, searching for Vrindavan or the place of Krishna's birth, he has a feat or whatever it was, and he was unconscious for a while all his companions were around, and people around who were passers-by thought it was they who has done something to this rishi or whatever, the saint, and they were all very angry and they almost took the swords out. How dare you are treating, or what have you done to a saint? Without recognizing who Chaitanya was, but he looked like a saint or a religious figure or whatever it was. So a sort of a atmosphere of tolerance and all that was already into existence. We already know that Sher Shah has introduced bilingual documents for the convenience of his non-Muslim, non-Persian knowing, or at least not, those who did not know the script, Persian script. So the Persian orders were also written in Nagri script. The documents are still extant. So one should first keep this in mind. Then it also depends on the person's own personality. So as far as Akbar was concerned, perhaps the tolerance was his personal trait. Because of interest in people at large. Here is a man, a young boy, king, who is just keen to meet people, to behave as a common ordinary man, and in disguise he goes to a mela or a fete, and when there is any doubt that, or there is any risk that he would be recognized, he feigns to be squint, make faces, and then somehow comes back without being recognized. So meeting people, not only meeting people at big gatherings, but meeting individuals. The case of a unknown or a very ordinary person, Ramdas Dyer, is not by now quite known to people, that how this person, who was an ustad, or rather a painter, master painter, met Akbar, and Akbar immediately gave him the first evidence of the use of word jagir as a salary. And while in 1562, as early as 1561, and it was only a very small jagir, and while in 1562 he became old enough not to be able to do any job, that was converted into an inam. And the relationship with the emperor and this small dyer continued so much that in 1565 he is writing a letter that the officer of the region is troubling him, and Akbar immediately takes an action. So this is also, one has to remember that there are traits of person's own personality, and that has also to be kept in mind. It was much before the concept of any sulh-e-kul or anything, that in 1565 onwards Akbar started giving grants to Vrindavan temples at the recommendation of Raja Todarmal. And not only giving grants, but also interfering in the working of the temples, that he can also decide that it would be, who would be the adhikari of the temples. He will be issuing a farman for that. So, and this sort of orders were interesting in that they were also having Sheikh Abdul Nabi's seal, the order which says who would be the adhikari. Sheikh Abdul Nabi has no qualms in signing a document where the emperor is organizing or conducting the worship in the temples. So this situation was very different. So we have all these, and whenever we will be finding much before 1580 or 1579 a seal of Todarmal, where there is also a seal of Sheikh Abdul Nabi. Below that, as is the practice, the file writing, Todarmal, Bande Dargah, Ram ki Panah. So while we look at all those things, we have to remember that whatever was the situation, this was something not abnormal or something extraordinary to think of a reconciliation. A reconciliation of the type was already there. But to give a much more formal position, we see that what started happening. One may agree with Badanyuni to that extent that it was Akbar's successes, extraordinary successes, that made him more, in a way, in a way attempting to thank God for what he was, because some of those successes were really unique and in extraordinary situation achieved. The military successes particularly. And it was on that basis that Akbar decided that there should be some way of worshipping the God, and the best way is to discuss religion and to have religious discussions. So he started the Ibadat Khana discussions. He is still, as far as religion was concerned, keeping in mind only the Muslim. So it was confined to the Muslim ulamas, or rather to the Sunni ulamas. A little later on, he started expanding it to even the Shias and others. And then again here Badayuni tells us that how the discussions were going on, and the heated discussions and almost unparliamentary language used. And while at one time it is well known that Akbar asked Badayuni that whomsoever is shouting or raising his voice or using the parliamentary words, he should be removed. Then Badayuni said, then nobody will be sitting over here. And Akbar asked, what are you mumbling? And he got up and said that, Your Majesty, I was then thinking no one will be left in the gathering. So he got, of course, quite disgusted, and it was by 15, there was another attempt, as we all know, so I'm not going into that of 1579, and he becoming the Imam Adil. So all sorts of experimentation to have some sort of a reconciliation. And then also in the meantime, the Ajmer Shrine becoming very important for him, that in 1580, Akbar decided to throw open the Ibadat Khana discussions to all. The Jews, the Zoroastrians, of course the Hindus, and all sects of the Jains, various sects of Jains and Parsis, Christians of course, with whom he was already in contact. So now the situation started changing. Now Akbar's ideas were also now having some change. The one thing which was much more important for him was reason. It is not something which should be accepted without what is the arbiter for everything is the reason. It was also the time when he was under the influence of pantheism. So the two things were coming together. The pantheism, which found everything as an illusion, topmost on Akbar's mind, perhaps. His interest in all the religions continuing, the translation of Mahabharata going on, meetings with the Christians and the Jesuits going on, all that was going on together, while there was now another intervention, and that was that how Akbar can have a policy of reconciliation, how far it is his duty to achieve that. Here, Abul Fazl's concept of social contract came handy. It is the duty of the emperor to provide or rather to give the correct path, to bring all these subjects to the current path and treat all as equals. There should be no discrimination, there should be no difference in treatment against anyone. So another style of a social contract, the social contract here was interesting, that it was at the same time divine. It was not the social contract where emperor can be or king can be either beheaded or can be overthrown, like what it was in England, but it was a social contract where the emperor was only answerable to the creator, to no one else. So along with pantheism, this new aspect of social contract came very handy, and it became very important for Akbar, or rather came quite handy for Akbar, to now have a religious conciliation. So it was now not the question of emperor distinguishing between different people, but the different people themselves are not supposed to distinguish among each other. This was the reconciliation which was achieved, where what one may say, reason was supreme. For everything a reason was provided, a logic was there. So pantheism really becoming or coming to the forefront with the explanation provided by reason. Now, if we turn from this sort of a concept which Akbar brought to another time, and that is of the time of late Shah Jahan, or rather Shah Jahan's time, we find Dara Shikoh, another one who is trying to have a reconciliation. But his reconciliation is of a totally different type. Unlike Akbar, there is no intervention of reason. Reason is not the arbiter. It is something totally off. So, Dara Shikoh took the mystic path that the 12 Imams were also there. So, caliphs remained 3, and the 4th caliph became the first Imam. So it was rather acceptable to both the sects, Shias and Sunnis. So this sort of interesting things were also there. And beyond that, he has the Sufis. Among Sufis, the women Sufis as well, the life of women Sufis as well. That was one work which he produced with much effort. The other, which came a little afterward, was Sakinatul Awliya, where there was now a narrowing down of the, what you may say, the ambit, and it was only on the 2 saints, Qadri saints, Mian Mir and Mullah Shah Badakhshi. So from a wider and a higher level, now he comes to this. But what really became very important for him was then came the Majmu al-Bahrain in 1654 and 1655. But before that, he already started the translation of the 52 Upanishads, the Sirre Akbar. So, and then the main attempt in the Upanishads was to find similarities in the philosophy of Islam and the philosophy of Hinduism. So there was no appeal to reason, it was no explanation of anything, it was more mystical a solution, less practical of course, which might remain only at the level of the intellectual level, and not coming to the ground. And while the Upanishads were going on, translations was going on, he wrote Majmu al-Bahrain, which was the common ground between the Sufism and Bhakti movement. Bhakti and Sufi, or to brought them together. Of course, unlike Akbar, Dara Shikoh didn't get the opportunity to really try to implement all these ideas into practice, to translate them into practice. It remained only at the level of intellect or discussions or writings or a sort of an enterprise, but never to be tested on the ground, because he never got the opportunity to do that. So in that manner one finds that there was, but whatever it was, Dara Shikoh's efforts were sincere. He was really convinced that there can be a reconciliation and between the religions, and not only the reconciliations, but the question that all religions are to be respected, and the idea that there should be a coexistence, not only a coexistence, but a unity of all religions, a different sort of a pantheism. All religions can become one because the source is one. So these two experiments were there. One finds that with the coming of Aurangzeb, and the situation was to change, and while it was Dara who has no link with the Akbar's ideas or Abul Fazl's ideas based on reason and at a higher plane, similarly Aurangzeb has no clue or no link with either the attempt of reconciliation under Akbar nor those under Dara Shikoh. Thank you very much.
For carrying forward the argument that the policy of Sulekul post-dated Akbar, it did not stop with him but carried on at least up till the period of Shah Jahan. You also pointed out, and we have been reading that as well, that bilingual documents, they were also something which was given to us by Akbar. That most of the documents were being written in Persian as well as in the indigenous languages from the period of Akbar. But then we have certain modern researches which show, and I referred to that in my introductory part, that we do have bilingual coins and other materials from the Rezavi period. There is a kalima, all right, but apart from that, in the Sanskrit, we do have a faithful translation of that in Sanskrit, and the terminology which is used is such that it should be understood by the common Indian people who are going to read that Sanskrit inscription on the coins. My question would be that if it all started during the Ghaznavid period, why did it suddenly disappear only to resurface during the period of Akbar? Number one. Number two, I would like to ask you about the fact that Sulekul is a concept which was known before Akbar, at least among the Iranians and among the Sufis of Iran. And we know, and Irfan Sahib has worked on that the Iranian Sufis did have an influence on Akbar's, emerging religious views. So, can we credit the policy of Sulekul to Akbar, or should we give the credit elsewhere?
Back and made all efforts, continued up till Bahadur Shah Zafar, one will say up till the last year, but particularly Muhammad Shah and others, whose you know better than I do, that playing Holi and all that was something which continued. Then as far as the bilingual documents are concerned, documents are very different from coins, because coins are going to be used by all people. That certainly doesn't imply that the officers were Hindus and those who were not knowing Persian. I in fact said that it started off by Sher Shah, and which suggests, because we know Todarmal came to Akbar's court from the Sur court and was already had the title of Raja before he entered Akbar's service. So he was a high officer, and we find that right in the beginning he is intervening on behalf of a Raja, and on his recommendation Akbar is doing many a thing right in the beginning. So Sher Shah, that means, was having the officers, non-Muslim officers who were not knowing Persian script, not only at the higher level but even at the lower level, at both the levels. because it was the Kagaz-e-Kham which are more bilingual, and sometimes it is not only the script is different. It is Persian written in Nagari script, if you look at those documents. So this was rather so as far as Ghaznavite period is concerned, I have not seen or not come across or haven't read about the Ghaznavite documents. Whether they survived or not, I do not know certainly. So this was the major thing. Did I leave anything out? Mr. Chairman, did I leave any question? Sulekul, I have already said that it continued up till now. Oh, yes, the Iranian. It's a good question I would like to talk about. I will say that on Akbar, the influence of the Iranians was quite strong. And it was certainly, as we all know, that it was the Iranis coming to his court, particularly Fatahullah Shirazi, who the different sort of a Sulhekul. It is reported by Badayuni that Fatahullah Shirazi is the only one who after 1580s is offering prayers in loud voice at the divan itself where Akbar is sitting, and that too in the Shia style. So the man who was there, who brought in the solar calendar, the Ilahi era, because Akbar was not happy with the lunar era, which was in India as well as in the Islamic world. That was not good for, or not very apt for revenue measures or revenue collection. So solar era, which was already in Iran, and therefore we find that it is the same Ardi Behesht and all that, the name of the months and the 22 days in a month, 32 days in a month, all that comes. Nowruz, which was celebrated right from the Delhi Sultanate period, continues. But of course, it could only be at the Akbar's court where people like Abul Fatah Gilani and Urfi Shirazi could flourish. We know Fatahullah Gilani has to leave in a bad shape from the region. Urfi didn't find a very conducive atmosphere for him in Iran, in Shiraz, and therefore came to India. And it was at the Akbar's court where he could say, Kufr ne Islam ne, Islam ek kufr ameez ne, neither the kufr nor the Islam, and he is not leaving Akbar out. The Islamic kufr ameez ne. What Islamic kufr ameez? It is Akbar's policy where he is mixing the two religions or others. I do not know what is the reason for the creation of the mankind. None of these can explain neither the kufr nor the Islam nor the Islam mixed with kufr. No one can explain. None of these can explain what is the reason behind the creation. Why God created. Where he can easily say that I went to break the idol, but while returning out of shame, I left behind my own religion with the Brahmin. Who else can say that, and that where else this sort of things can be accepted? So I will say that it was the both way things. If there was an influence on Akbar from these Iranians who were coming, like Fatahullah Shirazi, Abul Fatah Gilani, Urfi and others, then there was a conducive atmosphere available for them all, better than at their own place. Otherwise, who leaves the country where one to which one belongs to, and finding a better atmosphere at Akbar's court. Even for Urfi, it is said that he came earlier and he tried his luck in the Dakin, another Shia state, but couldn't flourish over there, and finally has to come to Akbar's court. He wasn't remaining at Akbar's court for long, or because of Faizi. And I'd like to add another thing further here. We have all this Urfi's poetry, which is really a sort of a dissent, very strong dissent. And in spite of that, Badayuni grudgingly writes that all that what Urfi writes, that sells much better in each kucho bazaar rather than the poetry of big. And he gleefully says, including Faizi. While Faizi's verses have no takers, Urfi's diwan or Urfi's poetry is so much sought after that at each kucha or bazaar you will be finding these divans selling like hotcakes. So no, that shows that what was the Indian audience like. It is not only the praise of Urfi, it is the main thing that what was the India like at that time. What thing you are reading, what you are trying to read. So I will say that if Akbar tried to somehow bring about some sort of a change, his people were receptive to have this change. So it is at another place, Badayuni writes, this country is very vast. He is talking about Sharif Amuli. And he says that anyone can come and anyone can say anything and everybody will be ready to listen or at best to ignore, but there will be no restrictions on anybody. This is too vast a country. So it's a very wrong-handed or left-handed compliment which even Badayuni gives to people of India. I don't know what happened to us now, that we should try to find out what's happening to our minds now and how we are under so much of spell of another world, but up till now we were different people.
Just a moment.
Yes.
Because, in the last few years there is a book which has come out, Finbar Flood, on translation of material culture, Hindu-Muslim clashes and conflicts, in which Finbar has tried to show that from at least 9th century onwards, especially 10th, 11th centuries, the coming together of both the religions through material culture was happening very much at every stage. We also know, for example, that Khan Sahib himself has brought out that Alauddin's periods, Mint Master, who has given Sanskrit translations and all.
Thakkar
Pheru. We have him as well. My only worry is that why is all the credit given only to Akbar and not to the period before? I sometimes feel that all these things started developing before Akbar. Well, you are quite correct. People like Fatehullah Shirazi and others could happen only in Akbar's court. But a ground was prepared before, and it was only after that ground had been prepared under the Lodis and under the Tughlaqs themselves that this could have happened. That is what I have to say. Now, as far as the Ghaznavid documents are concerned, we know that none of them actually survive. They don't survive. The coins do. And on the coins we do find the use of both Arabic and Sanskrit. So it's quite possible that even among the documents, because even the names are translated, Muhammad is translated into very clearly it is translated into the Sanskrit version of the name. Prophet is translated into avatar, for example. So my humble submission is that probably not much research had gone in the periods earlier than Akbar, and we should have a relook at that.
Yeah, but what I was trying to say was in a particular, and it's not only in Persian, but those are also in the local language or the whatever is the vernacular or what. So you will certainly be saying that the officers know that language, therefore there are officers. So what was the level of those officers and others? Coins is a totally different thing, because as I've said in the morning, that as far as coins are concerned, if Lakshmi is shown there, it will have more credence rather than anything else. So the early sultans also were forced to do that. So that is totally different. Then there was नहीं नहीं इन्होंने कुछ और है उसका कहा था मैं भूल गई.
The early 16th century onwards, when the Europeans began to come into India, following the sea route discovered by Vasco da Gama in 1498, and this connects with what Yasser also said. See, one of the first important observations we have from the Deccan area, from South India, and in fact almost all the company records from that period onwards, stretching on to the 18th century, observe the remarkable religious sufferance which used to prevail in India. The word which they use is sufferance. And because many of them were beginning to come to India from the Europe of the Iron Century, from the 16th to the 17th centuries. So it was remarkable for them that there was no religious strife. There was no organized religious strife in Indian society. It was something so remarkable to them, especially to the Protestants as well as Catholics, both of whom were locked in deadly combat for about 150 years in Europe, that sources again and again mention this. Apart from that, we have Malaysian sources on Vijayanagar, which become part of this entire Indian Ocean world. Vijayanagar used to play a very important role as an entrepot, at which not only land routes met, but also a lot of maritime trade used to devolve upon Vijayanagar. And Vijayanagar was also, although it was a Hindu kingdom, quote unquote, not Hindus in the same way as we conceive of Hindus today, it was also remarkable for its religious sufferance. And much of this is slightly before Akbar's reign, and some of it is parallel to him. And one particular kingdom upon which one particular sultanate upon which usually North Indian studies don't concentrate is the Bahmani kingdom of the Deccan. In the Bahmani sultanates, there was a conscious policy followed towards languages, towards culture. Ultimately, it yields a sultan like Ibrahim Adil Shah II, who not only called himself the Vishwaguru, but he became a great bhakt of Saraswati, and he used to write Saraswati Vandanan. He used to do poetry and in Khadi Boli, and he's one of the foremost poets of Urdu, Dakhini Urdu and Dakhini Khadi Boli, from which Marathi and other languages also developed later on. So I think there is this, there is a case for Sulakul already being part of the Indian ethos, which is grasped by Akbar and then capitalized upon, introducing his own version of Sulakul. You may tend
among the Catholics and the Protestant and different sects of the Christianity, while in India the situation was totally different. As far as the Vijayanagar Empire is concerned, it was the ruler who gave himself a title, Hindu Rai Sultana. So that we have also to remember that. And Deccan, of course, much credit goes to Deccan and all. So I never said that there was not what I'm trying to make out is that in India the condition was conducive enough to have, all those things were on the ground. Now to give it a sort of an intellectual garb was also something which was essential. In practice there are things, but you sometimes also want to have an explanation and a theoretical framework. What Akbar was really doing was, through his Sulhekul, providing also a theoretical framework which was acceptable to all. As far as the Indian situation is concerned, we come down even to Tipu Sultan, who says he won't sleep on the cot as long as the while the Marathas took away the image, that is not restored. Who gave so many grants to temples. Now, anyone can say anything and can write anything. So that is the big question. I think we should all try to knit our brows to get a reason. What's happening to we Indians today? All over the country. What gone wrong where? This is something which we must try. I think earlier there was a more commitment to reason. Now reason has gone and we are living in some other sort of a world.